Mike Ayala, welcome to the Financial Freedom Fast podcast. What is going on, brother?
Not a whole lot, actually a lot, but I'm excited to be here, man. It's going to be fun.
From what I've seen that you've got going on, what do you have going on right now? Let's just start off with that. What have you built for yourself, and what are the ventures that you're working on right now?
I'm in a huge transition. We're putting a lot of things to rest. We're transitioning out of some things. Some new things are launching. It just tends to be the season that I'm in. And we talked about this off camera a little bit, but I feel like round two, I started my first business at 24 and we started having kids. My first son was born at 21 and I'm now 44 and my oldest is 22 and my middle son, Tim, is 20 and Kate, my daughter, is 18. She'll be 19 actually next week. So yeah, I worked the last year or two. I've really been just looking at taking inventory, like what have we done? Where are we at? What do we want to continue? And what do we want to change? And so I guess if anything, that just means that it never ends.
So the inventory that you were taking, what have you done? What have you built up for yourself?
It all started in 2004. My wife and I decided with a business partner, we left our W-2 job. I was working full time for a plumbing and heating company. I was a plumber by trade. I got to digress for just a second. As a young guy, and I talk about this a lot, but as a little man, my dad was an alcoholic, drug addict, abusive, in and out of my life. So I had a really great example of what I didn't want to be as a father and as a husband. And I heard one of my mentors, if you listen to my podcast, Investing for Freedom, one of my favorite people in the world, his name's Rob Murgatroyd. And when he was on my podcast, he was talking about one of his friends said to him that there should be a statute of limitations on the amount of time that we let what our parents did to us impact us. And I think it's such a valuable statement because there's a lot of people out there that are probably listening to this even that are thinking of all the reasons why they can't do certain things or why my parents did this, or if I had just had this when I was younger, or if I had that same opportunity. And to me, that's all crap because I grew up, like I said, with a dad that was gone. Basically, my mom finally left him when I was 8. And the reason why that's important, when I started dating my wife in high school and we had some ups and downs and some separation time, but when we finally decided to get married, even at that age, so I was 20, she was 19 when we got married. We were doing a lot of visioning then, Matthew. What do we want our life to look like? How do we want things to be? And I couldn't have even begun at that point in time. If you would have asked the 20-year-old version of me, like, Mike, are you going to start your own business? Are you going to have an investment portfolio? No, I wasn't thinking any of that. I was not in that level of context. But what I did know, my wife and I wanted to be present. We wanted to have dinner every night with our children. I didn't want to be a Disneyland dad. I didn't want to be that dad that you took my kids to Disneyland twice a year. And that's when I was present. In fact, to the point where like my wife's dream was to be the best mom in the world. And so even when we got married and we started having kids, she was working then, but she would take her paycheck and we put it in a separate account so that we wouldn't get used to living on her income. And so when we started having kids, she was a stay-at-home mom. Like I said, I was a plumber. I'll get into the meat, but I thought that was important to digress because that whole concept is what really drove me all through the last 22 years from having kids. And we talked about this a little bit too. I'm in this different season because my children they're now young adults. And so anyway, I was working at a job. I was 23 years old. I was running a huge casino remodel. As a 23-year-old, I progressed really fast in this organization I was working for. I had between 12 and 20 people working for me. And literally, Matthew, I was working out of town 90 hours a week minimum. Sometimes like literally I'd be working 110 hours. I would drive home on a Sunday night. I'd have a cold meal. I'd wash my clothes and I'd turn around at 3 a.m. and go back for the week. All the time, this whole time, my wife is pregnant with our third child, Kaiten. So I'm missing my 2 boys growing up. I'm missing a pregnancy and I'm grinding. This is like totally contrary to everything that like we had been. So I said to myself, this opportunity came up, which I won't get into the weeds on that, but we had an opportunity to buy into the business we were working for. We decided not to, and me and a partner left. And I'll tell you what, it's hard sometimes for me to give advice to people that, are slowly planning their W-2 exit. I know you just recently exited. It's an exciting time, but there was no slow plan for me. I did not have this 1 year to exit. I was just like, this is not the life that I signed up for. And another opportunity came along. So me and my partner just left. We started this business and we literally had this conversation. If I'm going to be working 90, 100, 110 hours a week, I might as well do it for myself. So we left and started this business. And here's the crazy part. I was so in over my head. And if there's only one thing that we take away from this show, this might be some of the most important parts. Like number one, just sure that you're doing in life what you want out of life. Because, that life that I was making good money, and I was on a leadership trend and could have gone far, but I was not fulfilling like our core purpose, our core values as a family of being present, being a present father, being a present husband. And so that was number one. But number two was like, when I left and started that company, I had no idea what I was getting into. We started that company in July, or it was actually June of 2004. By the end of that year, we had 17 employees and we were doing $1 million in revenue. Here's the thing. I was so in over my head that from the very beginning, I was just hiring consultants left and right. How do I set up bookkeeping? How do I do sales? Hiring HVAC consultants. How do I set up systems? How do I hire better people? And that's the one thing that was the key to my success. So that company ended up being on the Inc. 2009 fastest growing companies in America. The point in all of that is just making sure that at every stage, like when you need to do something, jump into it. And so many people are frozen with fear by the money and I don't know if I'm going to be able to accomplish it. And when I look back, those two things, just being led with our values around the family and this is not what we signed up for. And how do I make that right? But then number two, just if you go back to that, like literally I was thinking I'm working 90 or 100 hours a week. I might as well be doing that for myself. And obviously as you fast forward to investing for freedom, I learned a whole bunch by doing that. But so many people think that they need to have it all figured out to make that leap. And to some degree, there could be a little bit of wisdom in that. I was young. I didn't have anything to lose. I didn't already have a nest egg. I wasn't already sitting on $100,000 of income or a job. I was literally talking to a guy the other day that wants to quit his job, but he's making $180,000 a year and he doesn't know how he's going to be able to do that. Well, that's the golden handcuffs theory.
Right.
The thing at the end of the day is like, when you need to do something and you're being led by your values, just go all in and figure that out. Because I heard this phrase the other day, it's impossible to steer a parked car. And I think if there's any bit of advice, it's just get moving, quit your job. But how do you know what's on the other side of it? How can you start solving problems? You can't steer a parked car.
And it sounds like you were guided a lot of this way by following Aaron Velke. He's a go-bro. He's a business coach. He told me about this concept known as the North Star. And if you follow this North Star, whatever your goal for the future is, your vision, and you follow that along the way, all of the little tasks that you have to do, as long as they're aligned with that, your business will move, your life will move in the right way. How are you able to keep yourself online with that North Star of being there for your family, being present with your partner, while also building out what you've built?
I'd be lying if I said we always did it perfect, because that's not the case. And there's plenty. I can give you two scenarios where things got out of hand and I literally could have almost lost my family in one situation. But here's the thing, back to that North Star, whatever that is for you. I talk about this all the time. Karen my wife and I, we run a couples mastermind, and this is high performing couples. And I hear this all the time, not just in our mastermind. I'm in a group called Front Row Dads. I'm in GoBundance. And the majority of the time, when we're listing out all of the reasons why we can't be home on time, or we can't be present, or we can't take a vacation, these are all just a bunch of excuses. And the other side of this conversation too, I've been asked so many times, Mike, how did you scale a company to over 100 employees at the age of 26 and all? We were growing so fast, I didn't have a choice. And when you keep that North Star, like you're saying, if I say to myself, I'm going to be home every weekend, or I'm going to be home every night, or I'm going to take 4 vacations a year, the way you do that is block it out and you protect that. And I literally remember, so Karen and I we map out our vacations, and as we've gotten older and the kids are older, it's not as important. It's important for her and I to sync, but we've always mapped out our vacations for the next year, because if that's what's really important to you, put that on the calendar first. And then come hell or high water, nothing gets into that. And I remember, I don't know if it was a vacation or if it was a dance recital or what it was. My kids all traveled. They motocross, dance, like wrestling. We lived in this little town, and so we were traveling to compete in sports all the time. I don't remember what it was, but I remember I was going to be out of town with one of the kids or a vacation or something. And I remember we were doing like a $3 million bid walkthrough at my largest client. And I get this email and they said, hey, we had to move up the bid walk. It's mandatory. If you're not at the bid walk, then you don't get to bid the project. And I responded and I said, hey, I've got a whatever it was. I'm not going to be there. And it's mandatory. If you're not there, you can't bid it. I said, fine, I'm not going to be able to bid it for you. Then I get an email back a couple days later and they're like, hey, we're going to do a second bid walk for those of you that couldn't make the first one. And it's just it's like a simple it's like a simple thing. I was willing to say no, and very seldom do your best clients, and especially people that you want to align yourself with. If you're truly a values alignment, very few people are going to say to you, Matthew, if you don't not take your family on this vacation and come to this, I'm not going to be your client. And if they do say something like that,
You don't want them.
yeah. And so I think we overcomplicate this, man. Like if you keep that North Star that Aaron, by the way, I know Aaron pretty well and I love the guy. If you keep that North Star, whatever that thing is for you, for me, it was, I know I can have a successful family and a successful business as well. And by the way, here's the real question. What are you doing all this for? Like at the end of the day, why are you building a business? Why are you building an investment portfolio? I heard Brian Tracy say this probably like in 2005 or 6. I was listening to an audiobook and he said, I've never heard somebody say, I wish I wouldn't have spent that much time with my children. And so all this, Matthew, is really just a bunch of bullshit, fear, excuses on why we can't get home on time, why we can't leave the office on time, why we can't take a vacation, all of the above. And really, there's so much talk about who, not how these days with Dan Sullivan. And I coached with Dan for a couple of years, but I was really good at who, not how at an early age because I refused to let my business get in the way of my life and my family and the things that were important to me. And the only way that you can get around that is backfill all of those things that have to get done with other people or other systems or other processes, or just say no to that work, whatever it is. It's really that simple.
A lot of our listeners between 18 to 27 years old, maybe they're getting into their first investment, their second investment. At what point do you think someone needs to bring someone in and pull the who, not how? Is it immediately? Can you just pull in a PM and it makes sense? Or should they leverage themselves to build the cash flow? How do you make that decision, prioritizing, do I need to bring people in or am I fine doing this myself?
I think a simple exercise that I've always known is what's my rate per hour? And when I get to a point where I can't handle any more work, then I have to literally take an inventory. And I'll make this simple. Legal pad. I've used a legal pad for myself and I've done this for 20 years now and I still do it. You'll talk to my operations manager. We just did it 2 weeks ago. So I keep a legal pad on my desk and I divide it into 3 columns. And in the column number 1 is have to. Column number 2 is should do. And column number 3 is shouldn't do. The way to really get to the point where do I need somebody? When should I bring somebody? What should I outsource? Keep that rolling list. And it's not anything that you have to rush through and do today or this week. Just keep a list. Every time you're doing something, just write it down. And so for me, and you're going to see this over and over, people are going to start keeping a list. And 90% of everything that is in their world is going to be in that have to do list. Only Matthew can do this. As you really start thinking about that and you start adding more and more to that list, there's too many things that Matthew has to do. And so you naturally start to move that over. Okay, if I'm going to analyze 100 properties a month in order to try to buy 10, and I can't analyze that many properties, what do? I hire an analyst. Well, if an analyst is going to cost me $100 and if I get to the point where that's what has to be done in order to buy those properties, something's going to move over. And so if it's $100 and I'm worth $100, then I'll keep doing that. But we're going to start moving things off of our list. And so I think just keep on moving that stuff over to the right. And that's going to answer the question you have. When do I bring somebody on? In this day and age, 20 years ago, when I started in business, there wasn't Upwork. There wasn't like all these side gig economy stuff. There's no reason. I'm working on a fund right now with a partner, another fund with the luxury vacation group. And he's been trying to get these financials done for a couple of weeks. And finally he said, I hired an analyst for $150 to finish this whole thing for me. And I'm like, genius, because we've been waiting for 3 weeks for this pro forma.
Right.
It's $150, outsource it, right? So I think the question is, it's a twofold question. What are you really good at? What brings you energy? What do you love? And then what are my dollar productive activities? And sometimes you're going to do things that are $20 an hour activities, even though you're worth $150 an hour because you love them and because you're really good at it. And that's fine. But anything that you're not great at and anything that isn't worth your time, you should start outsourcing.
And I think there's 2 topics from this podcast that we can link together. If you link that North Star up with leveraging other people, whatever you have to do that is taking you off the path from your North Star, it still needs to get done. If it's taking you off the path or taking you out of the mindset towards your North Star, you can outsource that to someone else. And yes, there's websites like Fiverr and Upwork, where you can hire people to do tasks for you very cheap compared to what we have in America, and help other people out from other countries that want work and it's good pay for their area. So going off of that topic, aligning the North Star with the who, not how mentality, how would you suggest that, let's say someone doesn't even have their North Star. You figured this out at 20 years old. How do you decide what that is and where your life goes? And does it change over time?
Can I tell you a little story to get to the answer?
But hear it.
Chris Ryan, who was the CEO of GoBundance, Matt King just recently replaced him. When Chris first came into GoBundance, the very first Champions event that was a standalone Champions event was here in Austin, Texas. And I showed up for it, and Chris messaged me. I hadn't met Chris yet. He messaged me and he said, "Hey, I talked to Matt King and we want to start doing a thing called a Champion Spotlight." And again, this was the first one. And he said, "Matt said that you'd be the guy to ask to do it." So I said, "Great." He said, "Meet me for coffee." So I went and met him the day before the event for coffee. And he says to me, "Mike, we start having this conversation when we talk about North Star, and I'm going somewhere with this. Like, we have to be careful because I think that we have this analysis paralysis, not just in investing, but in writing our values, in deciding what our North Star is, because we think that once we say, this is my North Star, that we can't adjust." And one of the things that I always say is, what do you really want? Why do you want it? What are you going to do to get it? Measure results and adjust. And the important part is adjusting, because you're going to change. Your circumstances are going to change. Your desires are going to change. And so when I was talking to Chris, I sat down with him at coffee and he said, "So tell me what's going on in your world right now." And this was 2.5 years ago, maybe 2 years ago. And I was really struggling at that time, Matthew, because everything that I had worked so hard to build, my entire identity that I had, like, we put so much time into building like this future version of us, right? That's all we're ever talking about. Your miracle morning, and you got to meditate and you got to journal so you can become the best version of you. And I agree with all of that. But I wake up 20 years later and my kids are graduating. They're all adults. And I've built this version of me that is, I am a dad. Like, I am a dad first and foremost. Then I'm a business owner. Then I'm an investor. So husband, dad, business owner, investor. I've worked so hard to build this, and like, it's all crumbling in front of me. I'm like, my kids are graduating. Like, I did the thing and I'm proud of what I did, but I'm like sitting here looking at this through the lens of backwards. And Chris started simultaneously, like, I had gone to one of my uncle's funerals, and like my great uncle, and the kids asked me to speak, and I hadn't seen this guy for 15 or 18 years, but nobody wanted to speak at his funeral. And so I'm speaking at this guy's funeral that's like dead, and there's some people there, but nobody wants to speak. And I'm having to beg people to give me stuff to say to him. And I'm like sitting here thinking, like, what is life all about? And so that happens. And I'm going through this period of time where, like, my whole dad identity is changing. And I talked to Chris about all of this, and I'll get to the answer here. Chris says, "Mike, you know what I want you to do? I want you to give your eulogy. Would you give your eulogy at the Champion Spotlight tomorrow?"
Wow.
And I was like, okay. And here's the point of all of this. As I was writing that eulogy, it took me a day. And I had all these bullet points on Mike saved the wells and put shoes on the kids and made this major impact. And Steve Jobs would say he made a dent in the universe. And I'm trying to come up with all this amazing stuff, Matthew, where when I died, 50 years from now, what would everybody be saying about Mike? And what would Mike be so proud of? And dude, I was really struggling. But then when I shifted, I went to bed that night. I said, you know what? I'm just going to get up early in the morning and take a crack at this, because it wasn't coming together. When I woke up the next morning, I shifted and I said, you know what? If I died right now, what would they say about me? So when I was going 50 years out, and here's the answer to your question. If we don't know what the North Star is, like, how do we get to that? The reason why we struggle with that is because we're going 50 years out. When I went 50 years out to do my eulogy, dude, I struggled, because it's all these things that, like, I wanted to be important and I wanted to make an impact, and I wanted these future people that I don't even know, like, what are they going to say about me? And this me 40 years from now, what's going to be important? None of that matters. So when you come back to the question of what if somebody doesn't even know what their North Star is, don't go out 10 years. Don't go out 20 years. Hell, don't even go out 5 years. If you died a year from now, what would you want to, if you knew you were going to die 6 months or 12 months from now, what would you want to do? Who would you want to spend your time with? What things would you go out and do and accomplish? And that in that thread right there is going to be the answers to your North Star. And then all the other things are going to come along and help you over the next year, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years to just build all of that. But we tend to go out, and just like with the eulogy, I couldn't get it nailed down because I was going out 50 years.
Right.
And I'm talking about my grandkids that don't even exist today and all this stuff. Come to today and you tell me what matters to you today, or the things that you want to change in your life in the next 6 months. And therein lies your North Star. And it's okay if it changes a year or 2 years or 10 years from now. That's fine. It's your life. It's nobody else's.
Can always be changing which star is the North Star and readjust the path. So I'm curious, can I hear what the eulogy was? Do you have it possibly at the tip of your head?
I don't have it at the tip of my head, but I can tell you the theme of it. We've talked about some of it. I talked about growing up, and I talked about my mother, and I did it in third person, obviously. My grandparents who helped raise me, and then met the love of my life, Kara, and the things that Mike was proud of. He built all these successful businesses and invested. But what he was really proud of, when I brought it back to if I died tomorrow, what would be said about me? I was proud of Dylan. I was proud of Tim. I was proud of Kate. I was proud of all the people. Mike would have been so proud at all the hundreds of people that are in this room, just talking about the small little impacts. Mike inspired me one time 10 years ago with one little thing he said. It was just that theme. And again, we want to save the whales and change the world. And we're going to do all of that. But the reality is, it's the people you impact. It's the lives you change. It's the motivation. Even why do you do a podcast? Why do I do a podcast? We're either sick in the head because I'm not making money on this podcast. I just love having you said this off camera. I freaking love, you and I have never met. And there's no way that after this conversation for an hour that you and I are not going to connect at some point in time in life and have deeper conversations. It's impossible whether I'm on your podcast or whether you're on my podcast. There's no better way to not only influence each other and make deep, meaningful connections, but to influence the world. And so that was a thread of the eulogy. Dude, I'll tell you what, anybody that's listening should try this if they got a small, intimate group. Just do it with your GoPod or whatever. There wasn't a dry eye in the whole room, including mine. Chris had his arm on my shoulder. Dude, I died that day. A part of me died, but a part of me was also reborn, because the part of me that died was that guy that was ego driven and trying to write my eulogy 50 years from now.
Right.
That was born was the guy that realized, you know what? Only today matters. And so when I shifted that and started writing it through the lens of what if I died today? What would people say about me? What matters today? That's what's important.
I love that. That is amazing. I'd like to dig into, because there's a lot of people who have issues with the way that they were brought up. Their parents, maybe they were alcoholics. Maybe their parents weren't financially literate. Maybe they ignored them their entire childhoods. And there's different things that they can blame and put on their parents and their upbringing. How were you able to take your dad in this situation and create it into something positive for you and build your mindset into what you don't want?
I work with a coach. I've been working with him for 2 years now. His name's Dr. John Ryan. And man, he's just been fabulous. We've done a lot of deep work. And on that question, I've always just been a forgiving human. And I don't know if it's just, I think we're all born with different graces, different gifts. I'm not going to say that I was never sad, because I was sad. But I remember so I started going to church when I was like 18, because I went off the deep end in high school, and I'll just share, methamphetamines, I was dealing drugs, off the charts, gone.
Right.
My wife, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, we were not together during that time. And so when I sat in jail for a while, and then when I got out, I decided to clean my life up, started going to church. And I remember on Father's Day, I remember the youth pastor giving a talk on Father's Day. And I wasn't married yet. And he was just talking about the love of God and the heart of the Father, and how most of us had expectations and here's the thing, man, woman, I don't care if it's dad, mom, brother, sister, best friend, business partner, we will fail each other. There is absolutely no way that not fail each other. And so I think it's just a natural grace that I have. And listening to that youth pastor, he was talking about the heart of the Father, and God is not this way. And those of us that grew up with dads that were not in our lives, I literally felt, Matthew, like I should be breaking down crying, because there's people crying everywhere. And for a minute, I literally thought that maybe I was so hurted, because I'm I should.
No emotions whatsoever. Yeah.
I'm broken, man. I'm broken. Right. And then the next part of this, my wife and I are getting married a year or two later, and And she tells me, I feel like you should maybe find your dad. Don't bring any baggage into the relationship. Go find your dad, make this whole thing whole. And I was like, I'm good. Like, I'm good. And plus, like, I have a stepdad. This is another part of the story who was amazing to me. And the more I started thinking about this, I'm like, what is a dad? And so to answer your question, like, I think part of it is a grace that I have. And so I don't like judge anybody that has deep rooted issues because it's a real thing, like dealing with our trauma. My wife's a breathwork facilitator. I work with a coach, like I said. So there's people that have serious trauma. They need to deal with it. So for me to sit here and say, I had serious trauma growing up. I've watched my dad beat the living crap out of my mom many times. So I have trauma, but I dealt with it in a different way. And so for me to judge the way that one person deals with trauma versus mine, that's not right. But the thing that I can say, here's what I know for sure. Whatever you need to do to get help and get through that, you need to do that, because whatever happened to you 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 100 years, it doesn't matter. I could be mad at my dad and I could keep that trauma inside, or my ex-girlfriend or my ex-wife or whatever it is, my business partner. And really the only person that I'm hurting is me and the future version of me, because it's ego that wants to keep us connected to that former trauma, pain, issues. And reality is, like, my dad's not tracking me down, trying to re-enter my life. And so if I'm mad at him and I don't want to meet him or be with him or whatever, because he left me, so I'm not going to come see you, and all these reasons, that's just ego, because he's not even, maybe he's thinking about me, I don't know, but he's not even thinking about me. And so therefore I must move on in order for me to achieve the best version of me. And so the one thing I want to make really clear, we all deal with trauma differently. And there is like actual chemical imbalances. People need depression. So I'm not like an anti-depression medication type guy, but I've never needed really any of that. Even when I got off meth, my wife's like, how did you do that? I'm like, I was so done and I found a way to replace it. But the thing I've said forever is, you cannot help an addict until that addict is ready to be helped. And I know that because until I was ready, nobody could help me. So I went all over with that. But the reality is, like, how do you move on from that? I don't know exactly how each individual is going to navigate that, but whatever you have to do, find a coach, find a doctor, find a mentor, find a friend, find the strength within you, but you have to move on. That's it.
And I think the first step is really recognizing that there is something there that you want to move on from. And then once you recognize it, the dark places can sometimes take you to some of the most light places. Recognize it and go do what you need to do. So it seems like you're pretty grounded in the present moment. And I was listening to one of your podcasts. It was titled, "The Grass is Not Always Greener." What do you think about, and has this been a topic in your life, something that you followed, that right now, my position right now is awesome? Have you tried to stay grounded in the present moment, that you love your life right now, and that in the future, whether it's a new investment that you're going to buy, a new venture you're going into, you'll love that life too? But I think there's a lot of listeners right now who feel stuck in their W-2 and in their day job, and they are like, this sucks right now. I want to make more money. And it's almost like when you want to make more passive income, the passive income almost goes away from you. It runs away. Have you adopted this philosophy that right now is my life and I'm happy with my life?
I was fortunate to learn a lot of lessons really quick as a young human. And I don't know if this is a gift of mine, like learning the lesson and just trying to anchor it and move on. But that being said, I sold my business at the age of 34 in 2014. And I've often said it was the best and worst day of my life. I know there's a passive income part of your podcast, and I still to this day get a multiple six-figure payment every year from the exit of that business. But I've often said that was the best and worst day of my life. And I have since had the privilege, Matthew, of sitting with, literally last week, a guy who exited his business for $1 billion. And I wouldn't have known when I first sat down with him to dinner and 5 other couples that he was a billionaire. And he made a comment, and I've heard this comment multiple times in the last couple of weeks too. The day that you get whatever that thing is that you're chasing, you get that dopamine hit for a minute and then we're just right back to it. So mine wasn't $1 billion exit. Mine was that was a 8-figure exit, basically valuation. And then I had too, when we exited, I had 45 single family properties, 3 commercial buildings, 5 mobile home parks, just my wife and I that we had bought with as a 34-year-old person. Well, I'm literally retired at the age of 34 and it's the best and worst day of my life because I had spent the last 10 years building this business, wanting to make it the best business ever, showing up every day, trying to make my humans that I employ better so that we're all better. I did that every day for 10 years. And then all of a sudden I have the portfolio that everybody wants. I have the exit that everybody wants. But what am I asking? Now what? What? And so everybody's probably saying, oh, poor Mike. But the thing that I'm saying is that if you even talk to a billionaire that has everything that I now want, the jet and the yacht, and to be able to, why? Like, why do we want that? And is it really going to be a permanent experience? And here's the thing with it. Can I just have that experience today? So many people are chasing some future version of themselves, but really even thinking about vacation. Why does somebody hate their W-2 job? Here's the thing. And by the way, I'm not anti-W, but the other side of it, I've said this all the time. Your boss will never pay you enough to be his neighbor.
Right.
I'm not anti-W-2. In fact, I want to encourage my employees to grow and dream. The reason why we're all unhappy with our W-2 job is that we think by having this investment portfolio or our own business or whatever it is, that's going to help us accomplish what we want. What do you really want? That's the question that I always ask first. What do you really want? And most of us want to be able to take a vacation once a quarter. If I'm not feeling good today, Matthew, I'm not going to the office because I'm not going to spread until I center myself and get grounded like you were talking about. I'm not going to the office. And most W-2 people just, if they need a day off, if their aunt gets sick, if they need a personal, that's what we really want. We want vacations. We want to be able to we want freedom. Like we want a version of freedom. But here's the thing that happens, and I've seen it over and over again. So we have a $100,000 job. We work our rear end off so that we can quit that job. So in order to do that, we're going to start our own business or we're going to get some level of passive income. And here's the crazy thing. So I had 5 mobile home parks. When I sold my business, I went full time into mobile home park buying. Me and my partner bought 35 communities and almost had 100 employees again. And I woke up one day and what used to be an easy passive investment business for me was now just another freaking business. I've got 100 employees. I'm racking my against the wall. Like I have an acquisitions team. If we're not buying, we're not making money. If we're not raising capital, we're not making money. And so again, there's a scripture in the Bible that says, do not despise the day of small beginnings. And there's a really good reason for that, because the day of small beginnings are really where we get to learn that North Star and what is it that we really want and how do we get there. And the things, if you don't get clear on that, I'm glad that you brought up Aaron Velke and the North Star, because if you don't get clear on what that is, you're going to wake up one day and you're going to end up some direction down the road and you're going to have 100 rentals or 500 employees or whatever it is for you. And you're going to realize that just like you weren't happy in your W-2, you're not with your investment portfolio. You're not happy with your business partners. You're not happy with all of your employees because why? You're not happy.
Happiness literally comes from the inside. You feel happy sometimes, maybe sometimes you feel upset. But if you can just ground yourself in happiness right now, the only thing that could bring to you is more happiness. If happiness is happiness here, that happiness is going to feel the same exact way when you have your private jet. You're deriving happiness. It's still coming from inside. You're just at a different point in your life where back then you didn't have the jet and you were happy then. And you can be happy now when you have the jet. But if you don't learn to be happy with yourself, even when you're working your job, working 50 hours, find a way to make yourself happy. Be happy that you found our podcasts and you're learning and you're excited to get out of this job. Like you're happy that maybe you found a new path in life that you didn't know was possible and you can create this entirely new life for yourself.
I love it, man. And so many people are waiting for when this, I will be X. And the reality is, I heard somebody say one time, if you're a miserable son of a bitch today, you're going to be a miserable son of a bitch on your private jet. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't change anything. And what we all want is human experience. We want good friends. We want great relationships. We want a great relationship with our spouse, our partner, our children. Like that's the thing we really want. And one thing I've been really focusing on this last year And it's almost like a Johari window, the 4 circles where they cross over. Everything you want, if anybody stops and anchors on this statement that I'm about to make, everything you want has a human within that circle. There's almost no experience that we actually want in our life that isn't a human experience attached to the other side of it. Sometimes do we want to go do solo trips, be on our own? Yes, but the reality is our spouse, our significant other, our intermediate family, our extended families, our investors, clients, etc., and then all of our friends and relatives, like everything, and where that crosses over in the center of all of that is you. And the reality is, if you're miserable today and you think that 2 years from now, when you execute your passive income plan and you quit your job, you're going to be happy. Most of the people that you want in your life are not going to be there for that day because you're a miserable son of a bitch, like that guy said. Right. See, so we just have to get that straight in our head. There's that future day that's out there. Don't live for that day. Fix it today and then head toward that North Star, because today is the only thing that matters.
If you think that once you get to that point, that's when the relationships come, that's when all of these things come, it's going to be the same thing as the happiness. If you're not fostering the meaningful relationships right now, when you quit your job and get out and you're living on passive income, what's going to change? You still haven't learned how to build relationships. You haven't been putting in the effort and the time needed. So I really do think it's all about living in the now and taking the current moment for what it is and building your happiness into the now. So I think that we've covered some really awesome, meaningful topics. So our final questions here, and yes, this podcast has to do with financial freedom. It's Financial Freedom Fast Podcast, but that doesn't mean that we only have to talk about cash flowing assets and high performing strategies. We can talk about the mindset aspect of things and the North Star and aligning yourself with your goals in your business. So what is one actionable step our listeners should take today to start on their path towards financial freedom?
One more kind of out. So we talked about splitting the paper. And the other thing that I'll say too, because I think, again, it's really important for you to design the life you want. What do you want life to look like? And the thing that I would say too is make a list of the 10 people that you're most inspired by and just write down the characteristics that they have. And that'll help you further like the values and the things in your life. And so actionable, what's another actionable, or what's a actionable step? I would just get really clear on what is the method. You and I think it was off camera that we talked about this, but there's so many ways to make money, literally. And I love that one of the things was like, what's the fastest way to 10K? So many ways to make money. Design the life you want first, and then try to pick a lane, or at least narrow it down to 1 or 2 or 3 lanes, and then go all in on that. Because, so I'll tell you, the one thing that my wife and I did, this is where we started. So I went to a business planning seminar, and it was with my coach that I was working with in the HVAC industry. And they asked us a question, and they made this statement. If your business isn't helping you achieve your personal goals, you just own a job. So even if you leave your W-2 job, if you don't clearly know where you're headed, then you just bought yourself another job and you didn't solve the problems. The question was back to what if money, this is the question that they asked. And I would just encourage your audience to go sit with this question. If money and time, and there was no limitations on either one of those, what would your life look like? And so the thing that my wife and I did, we said, okay, for the next 10 years, every year we would buy 2 single family income producing properties for 10 years. I owned 0 when I wrote this. I'd buy 2 income producing properties a year for 10 years. So we went, and my thinking was by the time I was 65, I'd have 20, they'd all be paid off. That would be my retirement. So I came back and we bought 2. Just by setting a goal, getting really clear on if money and time wasn't an issue, I set the goal, I'm going to buy 20 properties over 10 years. We came back, we bought 2. In year 2, a 72 space mobile home park deal basically fell in my lap. And by the way, as a side note, if you want to get tactical with your people, bring me back on at some point in time and we'll analyze 3 deals that I did that were home run deals early on that were just me getting in the right mindset. And then just like the mobile home park deal, it found me. So this was a $390,000 first note position. The investor was in trouble. She needed $80,000 cash. I didn't have the cash. I borrowed the cash from one of my mentors for the down payment. So I get it a mobile home park for $470,000. No money of my own.
No money.
72 space mobile home park in 2007. That thing cash flowed from day one. And I sold it 2 years ago for 1.65 million after making money the whole time with none. And why? Because I set a goal of 2 income producing properties a year for 10 years so that I could retire when I was 60. And then one of my mentors, Dan Sullivan, always says the eyes only see and the ears only hear what the brain is looking for. So once you get clear on what it is, this is my actionable step. Just get clear on what it is you want and why you want it. So I want $10,000 a month in passive income. Why? Get really clear on why. And then what are you going to do to go get it? And you'll start driving the car because you can't steer a parked car. And even if you have to adjust along the way, that's fine. I bought 2 income producing properties and then I bought 72. If I would have said, my plan is 2 a year, I'm only going to buy 2 single families this year, I'm not buying this 72, I would have missed out on that. But no, we can adjust along the way. So get clear on what you want. Why do you want that 10K? And then start talking about how you're going to get it.
You're clear on what you want too. You're going to notice these opportunities pop up more, where in the past they would have popped up to you and you would have seen them, but you wouldn't have thought anything about them. When you have that clear goal and the clarity on what you actually want in your life, you're going to say, hey, this thing will actually get me a lot closer to my North Star than a different opportunity. So that is awesome. I did not know that story. That's amazing to hear. Last question. What is one question or topic you wish I covered or asked? And how would you have answered, or how would you have elaborated, expanded upon that topic?
Such a great question. Maybe what's most motivating you right now?
What is most motivating you right now?
I was with, and this is all just relevant to different people's timing, but I was with Tim Tebow that was like 3 months ago actually now. And he made this comment. He said, when it's about us, there's no need to run, but when it's about them, we have to run. And I feel such a sense of urgency nowadays. We lost a really close family friend earlier this year to mental health and just the problems that so many people are going through nowadays. And that Tim Tebow statement has really, that situation and then what Tim Tebow said, it's got me thinking through a different lens. There's so much. I'm not saying that passive income and our businesses and all of that stuff isn't important, but I'm starting to shift more to legacy type thinking. Why are we doing all of this? And so that to me is really, what's the motivation? What has you excited right now to really peel back the curtain behind what's moving somebody and motivating them, I think is extremely important. So we're just living in some challenging times, man, and people are hurting, and it's about a lot more than just making money and quitting our job.
You've got and I said it was our last question. I'm going to go into one more here though. You've got the 18-year-old daughter about to turn 19, and basically, I'm not going to say an empty nest, but your North Star has been husband and then dad. So that maybe they're off to college, maybe they're not around as. Where do you see yourself going from here? All right. I know you're motivated. We talked about this off camera. What's everything? What's it look like for you now? What's next?
The first thing when I was going through that challenge and I talked about Chris Ryan and great Mike McCarthy, one of the elders of GoBundance, he actually made the comment to me because I was really struggling. And he said, Mike, your dad days aren't over. Your kids may need you now more than they needed you even when they were younger, because there's this natural, I'm not saying that kids don't need dads. They do need dads. They very much need dads. But mom is a huge, huge part of those little kids' lives. And I think as they get older, and this is what Mike McCarthy said to me, he said, your role is just changing. You're changing to a father, you're changing to a mentor, you're changing to a friend, you're changing to a business partner. And so to be able to shift that thinking around it, my dad days aren't over. They're just different, right? And so I'm excited. 2 of my children have businesses already and they're flourishing. And we'll see what my daughter does. We've never really guided them, can do whatever they want. So I'm excited to see that. But also I'm excited. I heard this statement. This guy, Mike Chu, said this at our couples mastermind a month or so ago. He said that we all marry 2 to 3 people in our lifetime. The question is, will it be the same human or will it be someone else? Meaning that you go through different versions and iterations of who we are as individuals. I'm not the same person that Kara married 23 years ago. And the fact that we went right into childbearing and we raised kids our entire adult life. And so to remarry my wife, to reconnect to my wife and see what the next 20 years bring are really exciting for me. So I'm ready to engage, not only double down with her, I'm ready to double down with my adult children in their business. My son's in a pretty serious relationship and there could be grandkids in my future. And so I'm ready to double down with my wife, my children, but also I see much more business partnerships in my future. I've had a lot of business partnerships, but I feel like I've learned a lot and grown a lot. And I think I can bring a lot of value to potential business partnerships. And so I think that's another part of my next 20 years is really teaming up with other entrepreneurs that have a certain skill set, teamed up with my skill set and us together. Karen, I say this, in marriage, 1 + 1 can equal 100. In business, 1 + 1 can equal 100. If you and I are aligned and we're rowing the same direction, we'll get a heck of a lot more done than anyone else that's not in sync. So
that is so powerful. I have never heard that in the beginning, what you said there about you're marrying 3 different people, because you change throughout life, especially if you're having kids, you're going to be a different person throughout that. And then when they get older, they're out, you've got a whole different path to take there. So that is genius. Definitely going to get you back on again, and we're going to dig in a little deeper. But for now, we're coming to the end here. Mike, where can my listeners, watchers find you online?
I'm pretty active on Instagram at the Mike Ayala. And then the podcast is Investing for Freedom. Anywhere you listen to the podcast, we do have a YouTube channel too that we're probably going to double down on this next year, but those are the best.
Cool. Give Mike a follow, listen to his podcast, Investing for Freedom, and we'll be in touch. You'll be hearing from Mike soon again in the future. Mike, again, appreciate the time and thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.